There's one thing I hear most often, not from patients, from their children, from their wives, from their husbands. They say, "If I had known, I would have told him everything. I wouldn't have left that night. I would just sit next to him." They didn't make it, not because they didn't like him, but because they didn't understand what was going on. The body gave signals in days, sometimes weeks, but no one knew how to read them. And that's what I want to tell you right now, in the very first minutes of our conversation. Today, I will give you something that none of us received at school, at college, or from anyone close to us. I'll give you a language, the language of a body that is preparing to leave. 8 signs, each of which is visible from the outside if you know what to look at. After this conversation, you will never again stand at the bedside of a loved one and not understand what is happening. But before we get to the signs themselves, I need to tell you something important. Something without which everything else just wouldn't add up to understanding. And I'm asking you not to switch. Because this is where something begins that will change everything. Death in old age is almost never sudden, even when it seems like it. The body prepares in advance, methodically, step by step, in strict order. And every step is visible from the outside. Most people don't know that. And then they live for years with a sense of guilt for something that was not their fault at all. We used to think of death as a catastrophe, like a lightning strike. There was a man, and now he's gone. Sudden, cruel, without warning. But the truth is completely different. The human body does not die suddenly. It runs a very clear, very consistent program, a program of organized completion. And this program always follows the same scenario, with minor variations, but according to the same scenario. To make it easier for you to understand this, I want to suggest one image. Imagine an old house in the dead of winter. It's freezing outside. The heating barely pulls. There's almost no fuel left. What does a smart host do in such a situation? He's not trying to heat the whole house at once. He starts to turn off what he can do without. First, there's the garage. No one lives there. Then the workshop. Then the living room. It leaves warmth only in one room, in the bedroom, where life is beating. That's exactly what an aging body does when it enters its final phase. Only instead of rooms, he has organs and systems. He begins methodically shutting down what he considers secondary: muscles, skin, digestion, and directs all remaining resources to where the most important thing is, in the brain, in the heart, in the lungs. It's not a disease. It's not someone's fault. It's an ancient, built-in biological logic. The body does exactly what it's supposed to do. He protects the main thing to the last. And that's what's important to understand right now. All the signs that relatives see and that are so frightening, that cause arguments, tears, and feelings of guilt, these are not symptoms of a disease that can be cured. It's the body language that says, "I've switched to a different mode." And when you learn to read this language, you will stop fighting what you don't need to fight. And you'll start doing what's really important. Just to be around. So, the first sign, and I will start with him because it is because of him that conflicts most often begin in families. Conflicts that are not forgotten later, for years. I'm talking about not eating. Imagine the scene I saw in various houses. A daughter or son comes to an elderly parent. The table is set. My favorite soup, sliced meat, maybe the pies, the ones he always asked for. The smell is all over the apartment. They sit down next to each other, put it on a plate, and the person eats 2 or 3 spoons and pushes it away. He says, "I don't want to." Or he doesn't say anything at all, just turns away. And it begins. "You have to eat." "Well, another spoonful. If you don't eat, you'll get worse." Weeping. Persuasion. Sometimes irritation. "He did it on purpose. He's acting up. He wants to wear us down." I understand where this is coming from. Food is a concern for us. This is love. This is the simplest thing we can do for another person. Feed them. And when a person refuses to eat, it is perceived as a personal insult or as a threat. If he doesn't eat, it means he's fading away. It means he needs to be forced. But here's the thing. The body thinks very differently at this moment. Digestion is one of the most energy-consuming things our body does. To digest a regular meal, you need to start the work of the stomach and intestines, spend a serious supply of energy. This reserve is huge for a young, healthy person. An elderly person, whose body is already entering the final phase, has a different picture. There is little energy, and the body is literally faced with a choice: to spend what's left on the work of the stomach, or for the heart to make another beat. The choice is always the same. The heart is more important. Therefore, the appetite begins to fade. At first, it's quiet. A person stops wanting heavy food, meat, fried, salty. It all goes away first. Then he starts reaching for the liquid, broth, jelly, just water. Liquid requires less effort. And finally, at later stages, the feeling of hunger simply turns off altogether. The brain receives signals from tired cells and makes a decision. Don't burden us. Outside, you see a man who doesn't want anything. Inside, his body says, "I no longer need resources for construction. I'm getting ready to stop." And here I want to tell you what I tell my relatives right to their eyes. Tough, but honest. He doesn't die because he stopped eating. He stops eating because he's already dying. These are fundamentally different things. Because it follows from the first one. You have to force him to eat, and then he will survive. And the second one implies something completely different. Force feeding at this stage does not save. It causes suffering. I've seen it happen. The woman fed her husband with a fight every day. Persuasion, weeping, sometimes a scream. She believed she was saving him. But the throat muscles of an elderly person are already weakening at this stage. And the food that he swallows with difficulty may go not to his stomach, but to his lungs. This can cause severe pneumonia, from which the worn-out body will not recover. What seemed like a concern, that one more spoonful, could hasten the end. Not because the woman was bad, it was because she didn't know. Now you know what to do instead. Don't insist. Offer gently, without pressure. Put a glass of water or a little broth next to it. If a person wants to, he will take it. Moisten his lips with a damp cloth if he can no longer drink by himself. It relieves the feeling of dryness and brings real relief. This is the infusion. The main concern at this stage, not a bowl of soup by force. The second feature is closely related to the first. If the body stops taking in fuel, it's logical that it starts saving what's left. And the easiest way to save energy is to sleep. Sleep a lot. Sleep a lot. Relatives often say that he has become lazy. He is not interested in anything. I used to watch the news. I was interested. And now he lies for days on end, eyes closed. We try to rouse him up, turn on the TV louder, ask him to sit down and talk, but he just waves it off. I hear the same phrase in such houses: don't lie down, or you'll lie down. They speak with love, with the best of intentions, but they don't understand what's really going on. What's happening is this. When the energy reserve drops to a critically low level, the brain decides to shorten the waking time. This is not laziness. This is protection. In a dream, the heart beats slower. The metabolism slows down to almost zero. The body literally stretches the remaining charge for as long as possible. This is the same as the phone's save mode. When the battery runs out, the screen goes out, all unnecessary processes stop, and only the most necessary things work. At first, it's just long afternoon naps. Then the naps get longer. Then a person sleeps 16, 18, and sometimes 20 hours a day. Short periods of wakefulness become rare islands. He opens his eyes, recognizes you, can smile, ask for water, and falls asleep again. Don't wake him up. Don't slow down. It's not a disease that needs to be treated. It's a body that does everything right. But there is one very important thing here that should not be missed. You need to be able to distinguish a life-saving dream from an alarm signal. If a person sleeps a lot, but when they wake up, they recognize you, understand where they are, and can say a few words, this is a natural decline. Everything is going as it should go. But if yesterday he just slept a lot, and today he woke up in a panic, does not understand which room he is in, sees something on the walls that is not there, talks to people who are not in the room, this is different. This is not extinction. This is an alarm. This condition often means not imminent death, but an infection or poisoning of the body with decay products. It causes real suffering, and this can be alleviated with a single call to the doctor. Therefore, if you see panic, visions, or complete loss of orientation, do not blame it on old age. Call your doctor. It is important. So, we have analyzed the first two signs: refusal to eat and long sleep. Both of them are part of the same energy-saving program. The body cleans up expenses where it can, and both of these signs often appear before anything else. Sometimes a few weeks before the end, sometimes a month before. That's why it's so important to know them, not to count the remaining days, and in order to stop fighting with a bowl of soup and start just being around. And now, I will show you what is already visible with my eyes and felt with my hands. Cold feet. A strange pattern on the skin. Edema. And I'll explain why all this is happening and what to actually do about it. It is these signs that most often cause panic in families, and this is where the most mistakes are made. This is where scandals, tears, and recriminations begin, which then haunt you for years. Therefore, be especially careful. Take an elderly person's hand or touch their feet. If you notice that your feet and shins are cold, not just cool, but infused feels icy cold, even when the room is warm, even when he is covered with a blanket, this is not an accident. This is one of the earliest and most reliable signals that the body has switched to a mode where all resources are directed to the center. Let me explain what this means. The heart is a pump. His task is to drive blood throughout the body, from the head to the heels and back. A young, healthy heart has no problems with this. But the heart of an elderly person who has been working for 80 or 90 years is getting weaker. It can no longer pump blood along this vast route with the same force. And then the body does what any system does when resources are scarce. He sets priorities. He decides who needs blood first: the brain, the heart, the lungs. This is the command center. This is something without which life is impossible, even for a minute. And the legs, the arms, the skin, they will wait. And the body literally blocks the blood flow in the periphery, constricts the vessels in the arms and legs. The blood goes from there to where it is needed more. That's why the feet become icy. Not because the person is cold outside. It's because there's just no hot blood inside to keep them warm. And no matter how many blankets you throw on top, no matter how many hot water bottles you put, it won't solve the problem. Because the problem is not the air temperature. The problem is that the pump no longer reaches the periphery. This must be accepted. Don't fight it. Don't look for the guilty. Just understand and accept. But the cold is not everything. There is something that is visible to the eyes and that scares people who see it for the first time very much. Look at the knees and feet of an elderly person carefully. When the blood flow in small vessels slows down almost to a complete stop, a strange pattern begins to appear on the skin. A grid of spots, purple, bluish, sometimes purple. Divorces, streaks. The skin becomes like cold marble. People who see it for the first time think that it's huge bruises or that something terrible has started. It scares the shit out of you. But in fact, it's just blood that has congealed in small vessels. It doesn't move, it doesn't pulse, it just stands there and shines through the skin just like that, in spots and streaks. Remember one very important thing. If you see this marble pattern that starts at the feet and slowly rises up to the ankles, to the knees, this is one of the most reliable signs that the body has switched to a very strict economy mode. This is not the beginning of the road. This is the finish line. And this knowledge gives you something very valuable: time. It's time to say something important. Time to just be around. Don't waste time arguing about why he's not eating. Along with skin changes, the color of nails almost always changes. They turn bluish, sometimes gray. This means that oxygen is no longer reaching the tissues in sufficient quantities. There is blood, but it is poor. It does not carry what is needed. Nails are like a little indicator on the dashboard. They show that the oxygen supply is disrupted. Now let's talk about edema, because it is precisely because of edema that the most heated arguments break out in families. By evening, a person's legs fill up, the skin stretches, becomes shiny, dense. If you press your finger on the shin, a deep fossa remains, which does not flatten out for several minutes. Relatives immediately begin to look for the cause and the culprit. You gave him the pickle. He was the one who drank too much. It is urgently necessary to remove salt from the diet. And a person is deprived of the last joy, delicious food. They are transferred to bland porridge with a scandal, with a sense of guilt, with the feeling that if you remove the salt, the swelling will go away and everything will get better. But it's not about cucumbers, not at all in them. The fact is that at this stage, the heart can no longer cope with pumping fluid from the bottom up. It's getting weaker. And the kidneys, which receive less and less blood, stop removing water in the right volume. The liquid simply accumulates in the tissues because the pump is not pulling. And scolding a person for swelling is like scolding a car for having a flat tire. The flat tire is not because the car is bad. It's just the way the circumstances turned out. What should I do about it? You can lift your legs a little, put a pillow or a rolled up blanket under them. This helps the liquid flow out a little. It brings some relief, but it doesn't fundamentally change the situation. And this needs to be accepted. Edema at this stage is not something that can be cured with proper nutrition. It's part of that process. Now, I want to move on to the feature that is impossible not to notice, because it sounds literal. I'm talking about breathing. It is the changes in breathing that most often cause the first infusion in relatives a sense of panic. Because breathing is what we hear, especially at night, especially in silence, when everything else is quiet, and suddenly something strange comes from the next room. It starts gradually. At first, the person begins to speak in short phrases. He used to be able to tell a story from beginning to end. Now, 2 or 3 words and a breath. Get some water. Open the window. The lungs are losing their strength. They can no longer fully expand with every breath. And instead of deep, calm breathing, frequent and shallow breathing appears. And then begins what I want to describe to you in great detail. Because if you see it one day and you don't know in advance, it can become a disaster with a heavy blow. That's what it looks like. A person takes several deep breaths, first deep, then quieter, quieter, quieter. And suddenly, there was silence. The chest stops. He doesn't breathe for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Sometimes the pause lasts 30, 40 seconds. It happens that for a minute. In those seconds, the relatives freeze over the bed in horror. It seems like everything is over now. Someone starts shaking the man, someone shouts his name, and then a sharp, convulsive, loud sigh. It was as if a man had emerged from the water, and the cycle starts all over again. A few deep breaths, hush, hush, pause, a sharp sigh. Why is this happening? The respiratory center is located in the brain. It is he who gives the command to the lungs, inhale. But when the brain gets less and less oxygen, this center begins to work unstable. He falls asleep and forgets to give the command to inhale. Then suddenly wakes up in a panic and makes him breathe convulsively. This does not mean that the lungs are broken. This means that the dispatcher is tired. He's working his ass off. If you see such breathing, rhythmic pauses, followed by bursts, know that the reserve of the system is almost exhausted. This is no longer an early stage. It's very close to the final. No one can say exactly how much. Sometimes it's hours, sometimes a day or 2. But it's a signal. It's time to be around. Don't stray too far. Talk about what's important. But there is another sound, the one that is popularly called the death rattle. You're sitting next to me, and you can hear something gurgling, bubbling, and wheezing with every inhale and exhale. The sound is moist, deep, sometimes like a crackle, sometimes like the purr of a very large animal. It's scary. It scares a lot. And almost everyone's first reaction is the same. He chokes. We need to help. I need to clear my throat. People grab spoons, try to make something with their hands. Some people reach for the vacuum cleaner in a panic. Stop it. This is the most dangerous mistake that can be made at this moment. Now, I'll explain what's really going on. In a healthy person, the muscles of the throat work constantly. Even when we sleep, we automatically swallow saliva. It happens by itself. We don't notice it. But in a person who leaves, these muscles shut down. They don't get commands anymore. Saliva and mucus accumulate in the back of the throat. And when air passes through this liquid, it creates that gurgling sound, like a straw in a glass of water. That's all. And that's the most important thing. This sound is not painful for a dying person. For you, a person at this moment, as a rule, is in a deep half sleep or has already lost consciousness. His perception is disabled. He doesn't feel suffocated. He doesn't suffer from this sound. But your attempts to do something to his throat are a real physical pain. It's a gag reflex. This is a risk of injury. You are causing suffering by trying to help. The only thing to do is to gently turn the person on their side. Put a pillow under his back so he doesn't roll over. In the side position, the liquid drains away under the influence of gravity, does not accumulate in the throat, and the sound becomes quieter. It's all. There's nothing else to do. Now let's talk about what happens to consciousness, because this is the most painful stage for the family. Cold feet can be covered with a blanket. You can try not to listen to the wheezing, but when a loved one looks at you and doesn't see you, it hits you in the heart. This is something that is difficult to defend against in advance. The brain, which receives less and less energy, begins to turn off the excess. And the first thing that goes away is the memory of what just happened. A person forgets that he ate 15 minutes ago, forgets that you just entered the room. He can ask the same thing over and over again. Where are the children? Although the children are sitting right in front of him. Have you come yet? Although you didn't leave. It's not because he doesn't want to get to know you. This is because the part of the brain that is responsible for now is almost not working anymore. But there is one amazing paradox here. While the fresh memory is being erased, the memory of the distant past, on the contrary, suddenly comes to life. The brain, losing today, suddenly highlights vividly what happened a long time ago. A man in his 80s may suddenly start going to work at a factory that he left 30 years ago. He can call his mother, who has been gone for half a century, and talk to her as if she were standing at the window. To name people who haven't been around for a long time, laughing at what happened in my youth. Don't be intimidated by this. He's not crazy. It's just that the connections that are responsible for the present have already collapsed. And those that hold the oldest and deepest memories, the most lasting of all, are still alive. He just lives there, where I was when I was young, where it was good. It's not scary. It's a kind of grace, if you will. Then comes what can be called an internal retreat. The person begins to turn to the wall, close his eyes, even when he is awake. He stops asking questions, does not respond to the conversation. His family is offended. He doesn't care about us anymore. He doesn't like us. He turns away on purpose. But this is not the case. It's not like that at all. Communication is a huge waste of energy. To understand what you are saying, to process information, to find the words to respond, to hold the thread of conversation, the brain needs resources that are no longer there. And he does the only thing he can: cuts off the outside world, goes inside in order to save the last shreds of strength to just continue to exist. Don't be offended by this. Sit down next to me. Keep quiet if you want to. Or speak quietly, calmly, that you love him. He hears. I'll tell you more about what he hears and how exactly. This is one of the most surprising and important facts in our entire conversation. But first, here's something I want to warn you about in advance, because it's not knowing about it that breaks families' hearts. The man has been lying for several days or even a week, hardly speaks, does not react, breathes heavily, his eyes are clouded. You have already started saying goodbye internally, and suddenly, one ordinary evening, sometimes in the morning, he opens his eyes. By infusion, he opens it for me. The look is clear, conscious. He turns to you, calls you by name, clearly, without confusion. He asks for water. He's asking about something specific. He's joking. He remembers something funny from the past. He's saying something important. The family is euphoric. Everyone says he's on the mend. The doctors made a mistake. The crisis is over. They begin to make plans for treatment. They call relatives who have come from far away. They can already leave. He is better. But this is not recovery. Before the brain goes out completely, it collects all the remaining reserve and outputs it in one short but powerful pulse, like a flash, like fireworks before dark. This period of clarity can last an hour, sometimes 2, very rarely a day. And then there is a sharp collapse and a finale. If you see such a sudden improvement against the background of a severe multi-day decline, do not be fooled by the hope of recovery. Use this time. This is the most valuable gift that a departing person can give you. Say what you didn't have time to say. Ask for forgiveness for what is burdensome. Tell me you love me. Just hold your hand and be completely here in this moment. Because right after this flash, as a rule, the same thing comes. And now I want to talk about something that is almost never said out loud, about what is happening in the last few hours, and about how to be right here. Because this is where most people do things that keep them awake for years. Not because they're bad, because they didn't know. When the body enters the very last phase, against the background of general pallor and cold, the skin suddenly begins to behave strangely. It remains icy in some places, unexpectedly hot in others. Your face may be red, your forehead may be hot, and your feet may be icy cold. This is not a fever in the usual sense, not a cold or inflammation. This is an organism that transfers the last heat to the center, to the head, to where the brain is. This is a redistribution, not a disease. And this is one of the signs that there is very little time left, literally a day or 2. What to do during these hours? Moisten your lips. Dry lips are one of the few physical sensations that a person can feel at this stage. A wet cotton swab or just a wet cloth passed over your lips is a real relief. Do not try to give water from a spoon. The risk of fluid entering the lungs is very high. Just wet it. That's enough. Speak softly. Calmly call him by his first name. Tell him something simple about being there for him, that you love him, that everything is fine. Don't make a fuss. Turn off the TV. Speak in a low voice. If there are several people in the room, ask them not to argue, not to discuss practical issues with the dying person. Not because it's ugly, but because it causes real harm. I'll tell you why right now. I'll start with the question I get asked most often. Most often, they ask in a whisper in the hallway, averting their eyes. Sometimes they ask questions right through tears. Can he hear me? Does he understand that I'm here? Is it worth talking to him at all if he doesn't react, doesn't open his eyes, doesn't squeeze his hand in response, just lies there, breathing or almost not breathing anymore? And here begins perhaps the most amazing thing that I know about how a person fades away. Something that reverses the whole familiar idea. We used to think about it linearly. First, the person stops moving, then stops talking, then stops responding to touch, and then at the very end, consciousness and hearing turn off. It makes sense, doesn't it? First the external, then the internal. But the science of brain function shows a completely different picture. The order of disabling the senses is not what we imagine it to be. And the rumor comes last in this order, the very last one. That's how it really happens. Vision is one of the first to go away. At first, the picture loses its brightness, becomes as if it were not colored. Then it begins to blur at the edges. A person sees only what is right in front of him, and everything around is getting dark. And finally, the picture goes out completely. A person stops seeing long before he dies. That is why at some point his gaze becomes fixed, directed at one point or at the ceiling. He doesn't look through you out of indifference. He just can't see anymore. Then the sense of touch, the ability to feel touch, disappears. The feeling of the warmth of your hand in his. This also turns off before the heart stops. He won't squeeze your hand back, not because he doesn't want to. This is because the signal from the skin no longer reaches the brain. But hearing is different. Those areas of the brain that are responsible for the perception of sound remain active the longest, much longer than anything else. Even when a person no longer reacts to anything, even when the brain's activity is minimal, it continues to register sound vibrations. It's not a pretty metaphor. This is what measurement of brain activity in people in a state of deep decline shows. This does not mean that the person is analyzing your words. It doesn't mean that he thinks about their meaning or can form an answer. The complex logic is already disabled. But he hears the timbre of your voice. He hears the intonation, feels the rhythm. And on the deepest, almost unconscious level, he knows that someone is nearby, someone familiar, someone he loves. And it changes his last experience. It's the difference between leaving in silence and solitude and leaving when you hear your own voice. That's why I always say the same thing to everyone who sits by such a bed. Speak. Don't be silent. Speak softly, calmly, in a low voice. Call him by his first name. Say, I am here. I am near. I love you. Tell me something simple and warm. Memories that you both loved. The story he told himself. Just talk. Even if it seems like he can't hear. Even if there is no visible reaction. He hears. Not like we're hearing right now, but he hears. And the second thing that follows from this, behave in the room as if he is fully conscious. Do not discuss inheritance issues in front of a dying person. Don't figure out who gets something. Don't argue about practical matters. Don't cry out loud right in his ear. Don't say things like, "He's barely breathing anymore," or "There's not much left," loudly to the whole room. This creates a noise chaos that the brain registers and which can cause a state of anxiety, even on an unconscious level, even when a person can no longer move. The last thing he hears in his life should be words of love, not an argument about an apartment. Now, about what happens to the brain at the moment when the heart stops, because it changes the way we think about death. For a long time, it was believed that death was like turning off a light bulb. The heart stopped, blood stopped flowing to the brain, and after a few seconds, the brain goes out completely and completely. But modern studies with patients who had experienced cardiac arrest, when brain activity was measured during intensive care, showed something completely unexpected. At the moment when the heart stops, the brain does not go out. Conversely, there is a powerful electrical surge in it. For about 30 seconds, and sometimes even longer, brain activity soars to levels that a living, awake person experiences only in a state of the deepest concentration, or in the phase of the most intense sleep. We do not know what exactly a person sees and experiences in these seconds. No one knows for sure. There are people who have experienced clinical death who describe very similar things. The feeling of flying, bright light, watching the key moments of life, fast as flipping pages, a feeling of absolute peace. Skeptics say it's just a chaotic discharge of dying nerve cells. Other researchers believe that it is in these seconds that the very viewing of life that people who have returned from that threshold talk about takes place. We don't know what it really is, but we know one thing. Death is not an instant shutdown. It's a process that continues even after cardiac arrest. And this knowledge changes something. It makes this transition a little less scary. Not because we understand everything now. It's because we know there's something there. At least for those few seconds. At least this last inner experience. Now let's talk about what many people are afraid of in advance and what takes almost everyone by surprise who was not warned. About the very last moment. About how it looks physically. Because in the movies, death is shown in a completely different way than it actually happens. In a movie, a person closes his eyes, his head falls on a pillow, and everything is quiet, peaceful, and beautiful. Life is getting rougher, and if you don't know about it in advance, it can become a serious injury. When the deepest, most ancient part of the brain shuts down, it loses control of the muscles of the face and jaw. The mouth opens. This happens almost always. The muscles of the face, which have held certain expressions, tension, and character all their lives, completely relax. And something happens that many relatives notice and then talk about with mixed feelings. Wrinkles are smoothed out. The face becomes very calm, very young. The man looks 10 years younger than he has looked in recent years. The tension of illness, the tension of pain, the tension of a life lived, it all goes away. That leaves something very clean, but at the same time, an open mouth, and sometimes the last breath. This doesn't happen all the time, but it happens quite often. At some point after the breathing had seemingly stopped, suddenly a sharp, loud exhalation. Sometimes it sounds like a moan, sometimes a cry.
Relatives who were not warned recoil in horror. It seems that a person is in pain, that he screamed in pain, that something needs to be done. No, it's not a pain. At this point, the pain no longer exists, because the part of the brain that perceives pain is already disabled.
What you're hearing is the air leaving your lungs through your vocal cords, which have contracted involuntarily. It's a reflex, purely mechanical. It's the sound of mechanics, not suffering. Don't be intimidated by him. It's a sign that it's over. And here's what to do in the first few minutes after. The most common reaction is fuss. As soon as breathing stops, people grab their phones, call an ambulance, start running around the room, open windows, and cry out loud. That's understandable. It's a human reaction to shock. But I want to offer you something else. Stop it. If it was an expected departure, if the person was ill for a long time, if you knew it would happen, you don't have to call at the same second. An ambulance won't change anything. You have time. 5 minutes, 10, maybe 15. It's a time of silence. Sit next to me. Just stay around a little longer. Many people who have been through this say that something subtle changes in the room after death. The tension that had been building up in her for months is going away. The smell of disease and struggle goes away. Something is coming that is hard to put into words. Many people call it peace. Not cynicism, not indifference, just an end to suffering. The end of the struggle. Close the person's eyes if they remain ajar. While the muscles are still warm, it's easy to do. Just keep your eyelids closed for a few seconds. If your mouth is open, you can place a rolled-up towel under your jaw so that it closes gently. These are simple things, but they provide something important. The feeling that you took care of him until the very end, that you were here, that he didn't leave alone. And only then, when you exhale yourself, when you take a few deep breaths, call a doctor or whatever is appropriate in your situation. Not before. Silence first. First, goodbye. Then, everything else. Now, I want to talk about what happens to those who stay. Because the death of a loved one is not only his departure, it's also what she does to those who were nearby. I'll start with the hardest part, the guilt. It comes to almost everyone. I have never met a person who has lost a loved one after a long illness and has not found something in himself for which he can reproach himself. It's built very deeply into us. We are beings who seek cause and effect. We need to understand why something happened. And if we can't find the reason from the outside, we look for it inside ourselves. I did something wrong. I didn't try hard enough. I could have saved you, but I didn't. I've heard it 100 times, in different forms, in different words, but with the same content. Why didn't I call the doctor earlier when he could still get out of bed? Why have I been swearing about food, spending the last few days arguing about a bowl of soup? Why did I think he was faking it when he was raving? Why did I go out for a smoke at the exact moment he died? Why didn't I tell him what I wanted to tell him? Why didn't I understand what was going on at all? And here I want to tell you something very important. Not to calm her down, not to say nice words, but because it's the truth, which I know from many years of practice. You acted out of love, from what they knew, from what they could do. You didn't know the body language that we discussed in this conversation. Nobody taught you that. We were all not taught. They taught us a lot at school: the structure of the cell, the Pythagorean theorem, and dates of historical battles. But no one taught us what a departing father looks like, how to read the signs of a passing mother, how to behave next to a person who is dying. This knowledge is considered to be something that comes by itself or does not come. And now it hasn't come, and you've made mistakes. But not because you are a bad son or a bad daughter. It's because you were operating in the dark. There is one more thing that is important for those who blame themselves for leaving the room and the person died alone while they were gone for a few minutes. This happens very often. So often that doctors and nurses working with seriously ill people have paid special attention to this. There is an observation that is difficult to explain logically, but which repeats itself over and over again. Many dying people leave at the exact moment when a relative leaves the room, even if he only goes out for 3 minutes, even if he was sitting next to me for several days in a row. Why this happens? No one knows for sure. One explanation is that some people can't leave in the presence of those they love, because the presence of a loved one keeps them here, gives them a signal to stay. And when a person is finally left alone, even for a few minutes, something inside gets permission to let go. This does not mean that you have abandoned him. This means that perhaps it was your departure that gave him this permission. Maybe he's been waiting for this moment. Maybe it was easier for him that way. If you carry this guilt, please let it go. Now about the other kind of pain that comes after, about the confusion, about the strange state that comes when everything is over, when all the formalities are settled, when people have gone home, when the silence suddenly became very loud. Many people describe it this way: I don't understand what to do now. I've been taking care of him for so long that now I don't know how to live without this rhythm. Every morning I got up and went to him. Every evening I thought about how he spent the day. And now, the void. It is okay. That doesn't mean you can't handle it. It means that you were really the one next to it. That you gave it your time, energy, and attention. And now the rhythm that held you is gone. And it takes time to find a new one. Not immediately, not in a week. Grief is not a disease that needs to be cured as quickly as possible. It's a process. He has his own time, and everyone has their own time. There is one thing I want to say in particular about tears, about what is often considered a weakness in our culture, when in fact, it is a strength. Many people, especially men, try not to cry. They're holding on. They say, you have to be strong. You have to hold on for the sake of others. And they last for a week, a month, sometimes for years. And then it comes out in a completely different place. Through irritation, through illness, through sudden attacks of longing at the most unexpected moments. Because grief doesn't go away if you don't live it. It just goes deeper and waits. Crying is not a weakness. Crying is a job. This is how our psyche processes the pain of loss. With tears, stress hormones literally come out of the body. This is not a metaphor. This is physiology. So if you want to cry, cry. Not in front of the dying man, not over his ear. We've already talked about that. But alone with yourself, with a close friend, with someone you trust. Allow yourself to do this. It's not a weakness. It's taking care of yourself. Now, how to prepare for the departure of a loved one in advance if you understand that this is happening. I'm not talking about documents. I'm talking about the human, about what's important in terms of relationships and saying goodbye. First and most important, If the person is still conscious, even if they are already very weak and have difficulty speaking, talk to them about what is important. Not about the disease, not about the treatment, about life. Ask him to tell you something you don't know, from childhood, from his youth, from a time when you weren't there yet. People leave, taking with them huge layers of history, their own, family, and common. And very often it turns out later that no one thought to ask, not because they didn't want to, but because it seemed like I'd still have time. Ask now. Write it down. It will stay. Second, say what you want to say. I understand that this is difficult. Sometimes there are years of understatement, resentment, and silence between people. Sometimes it seems that the words will sound awkward, inappropriate, too late. But too late is when the person is no longer there. As long as he's here, it's not too late. Tell him that you love him. Tell him that he was important to you. Say thank you for something specific. If there's something you need to apologize for, ask. It's not a weakness. This is liberation for him and for you. The third, let other people say goodbye too. If the dying person has people he loves and who want to come, give them this opportunity. Sometimes well-meaning families limit the circle of people around the dying person. They say he gets tired, he needs peace, don't disturb him. Sometimes it's fair, but sometimes there is something else behind it. Fear, unwillingness to show illness, desire to control the situation. And as a result, the person leaves without seeing those he wanted to see. And those who were not allowed in then live with it for years. Fourth, take care of yourself during the care process. Caring for a dying person is physically, emotionally, and spiritually difficult. It's exhausting. And a lot of relatives who take on all the care simply burn out at some point. They stop eating normally, stop sleeping, stop communicating with anyone except the patient. And as a result, by the time a person dies, they no longer have the strength even for grief. They're just empty. Allow yourself to go out. Allow other people to take over from you sometime. Fourth, take care of yourself during the care process. Caring for a dying person is physically, emotionally, and spiritually difficult. It's exhausting. And a lot of relatives who take on all the care simply burn out at some point. They stop eating normally, stop sleeping, stop communicating with anyone except the patient. And as a result, by the time a person dies, they no longer have the strength even for grief. They're just empty. Allow yourself to go out. Allow other people to take over from you sometimes. Allow yourself to eat, sleep, and laugh. Yes, laugh too. The fact that you laugh at something while your loved one is dying is not a betrayal. This is how the psyche protects itself. It is okay. Fifth, find someone to talk to. It can be a friend, a priest, a specialist in mental health care, another relative, someone who has gone through a similar experience. Don't keep everything inside. Because with support, it's transferred differently, easier. And it's not a weakness to ask for support. This is wisdom. In our culture, it is not customary to talk about death in advance. This is considered a bad omen, to cause trouble, to upset a person. We're waiting for this to become inevitable, until there's no time left for any conversations. And then it turns out that we don't know the simplest things. Where are important documents stored? Does he want to die at home or in the hospital? Are there any people who need to be informed? Is there anything he wants to convey with words, things, or stories? It's not a scary conversation. This is an important conversation. And the people who conducted it, as a rule, say that it was easier for them, that they felt less helpless, that they had at least some sort of reference point in the chaos of recent days. Start this conversation gently, without drama, not as a conversation about death, but as a conversation about life, about what's important, that he wants to be remembered. People often say, I don't want to remember him the way he was. People often say, I don't want to remember him the way he was at the end, sick, weak, helpless. I want to remember him healthy, strong, the way he used to be. This is an understandable desire. But I want to offer you something else. The last days are not only weakness and illness, it's also something very real. Something that only happens when all the excess is gone. When there are no roles, no masks, no responsibilities. When there is only one person left, the real one, the way he is. Many people who were there at the very end then talk about something they can't explain in words, about a kind of intimacy that wasn't there before, about something very quiet and very real that was happening between them and the dying man. Not because it was good, it was because it was real. These memories are also valuable, not instead of others, next to others. The person you loved was different, and in youth, and in strength, and in sickness, and at the very end, it's all him. All this is worthy of memory. We've come a long way in this conversation. We talked about how the body prepares to leave, how not eating is not a whim, but a biological logic, about how a long sleep is not laziness, but protection, about cold feet and marble skin, which are scary, but which now you can read. It's about breathing, which changes and sounds scary, but which now won't take you by surprise, that the rumor remains the last, about what the brain does after cardiac arrest, about the guilt that comes to those who stay, about memory, about the conversations that need to be had while there is still time. It was a difficult conversation. Such topics are never easy. And I want to tell you something right now. What you have heard up to this point is not an accident. People who don't need it leave in the first few minutes. Those who stay until the end stay because it concerns them personally, because there's someone they're thinking about right now, or because they themselves carry something of what we were talking about, feeling guilty, an unresolved issue, a memory that still hurts. There is one big lie that our culture tells us about death. It looks like the truth. It sounds like common sense. And that's why it's so easy to believe in her. This lie sounds like this. To think about death is to attract it. To know about death is to live in fear. To talk about death is to darken life. And therefore, it is better not to think, not to know, not to speak. But look at what this leads to in practice. Families who did not know the language of the dying body spent the last days of a loved one fighting with a bowl of soup. Scandals due to edema, panic due to wheezing, and attempts to wake up a person who needed peace. They weren't bad people. They loved, but they were operating in the dark. And then that darkness turned into years of guilt, into an unhealed wound, into the question, Why didn't I understand? That haunts me. Knowledge does not attract death. Knowledge removes fear. And fear is what prevents us from being real. I am with you at the most important moments. When we're afraid, we make a fuss. When we fuss, we don't hear. When we don't hear, we miss the things that are worth being around for. Live contact. Infusion your presence. Last words. The last touch. The last moment when the person is still here. The most important conclusion from everything we've talked about is not an emergency instruction. It's an invitation. An invitation to live differently right now. As long as those you love are still here, there's still time for what's important. You've been listening to this conversation, and most likely you've been thinking about someone in particular. About mom, about my father, about grandma or grandpa, about someone who is already getting old, who is already sick, who is already starting to change. Or about someone who is no longer there. And in both cases, this conversation asks the same question. What can I do now? What haven't I done, said, or asked yet? There are things that seem non-urgent, to call, to come, to say the same thing, to ask to tell something from the past, just to sit next to for no reason, without a holiday, without illness, just like that. Just like that, coming and sitting next to each other for no reason is something that people don't regret later. They regret that they didn't come. I want to end this conversation with the words that I tell myself every time I leave the room where someone just left. Words that help me not to carry it as a burden, but to carry it as something important and real. Death is not the enemy of life. That's part of it. The most honest one. The most inconvenient one. The most infused most of it. The one that reminds us that time is not infinite. That words have weight. That presence is a gift. That love is not something that goes without saying. And what needs to be said out loud is still possible. You've gone through this conversation to the end. It took courage. Most people leave when it gets uncomfortable. You stayed. It means that it's important to you, that there is someone you are thinking of. What do you want to be around for? Therefore, not in panic, but in understanding and love. Appreciate the time while your loved ones are still here, while they're grumbling about the weather, while they are asking to buy something in the store. As long as they call at the wrong time and tell you what you've already heard 100 times. This is life. Lively. It's warm. Real. Do not use this knowledge for fear, for love. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.